Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this month's Stowe Talks. My name's Ashley LaCour. I'm one of the partners of the firm, and this week we've got we've got an amazing chat with Mr. Tom Nash. He's a divorce coach. So let's just go through some initial bits. So, evening, Tom. First things first. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm very well, sir. Thank you so much. So, let's just go over a bit of ground rules, guys. There's a chat feature. There's a Q&A feature. Can we keep it nice and light in there, please? Nice and friendly. If you've got anything in there, please drop it in there and we'll get to some questions at the end. But this month is all about navigating parenting with a difficult ex-partner. And Tom, if you are ready, I'm happy for you to get going.
Absolutely. Thank you very much and for the kind introduction. Hello, everybody. It's nice to be back. I've done several of these talks now with Stowe, and we collaborate a lot on different things. And one of my passion areas is working with parents and co-parenting and a whole host of different things. So thank you very much for having me back. We've got a series of slides. I'll be making them available to the team at Stowe. So if anybody wants to kind of request those afterwards, you can do as well. Like as you said, there is like the chat and we can do Q&A as well. And we've got some designated time at the end for Q&A as well. I've got a series of slides that we're going to go through, but just kind of we're not going to cover every single minute granular detail on there, but we'll cover as much as we can in the time that we've got. So if there's anything on there that you want to ask questions about or go into a bit more detail, feel free. Cool. So just very briefly, as a bit of an introduction, if you haven't come across me before or aren't aware who I am. So Tom Nash, as actually says, otherwise known as Mr. Divorce Coach or the guy in the yellow chair, as I commonly get referred to. I'm actually the UK's first male divorce coach. Unfortunately, there's very few male divorce coaches around. So I think myself and some colleagues are proactively trying to change as we bring more men into the fold, talking about the lived psychological, emotional experience of going through a divorce or separation. A few other bits, I describe myself as kind of second generation divorcee. So I'm the child of divorced parents from a very young age. I've been growing up in a blended family since 1986. It wasn't called that then. So I've also the ex-husband of my own divorce and father, co-parent, as well as stepfather as well. So I've been living and breathing this world of blended families, co-parenting, separations, etc. Pretty much my entire life. That needs to be updated. It's actually slightly more than 40 plus years now, personal professional experience. Like I say, one of my passion areas is working with parents going through separation and divorce for the personal reasons that I've experienced. One of my passion areas is with co-parenting as well as step parenting and blended families as well. I'm going to talk about different parts of that as we go through. In terms of accreditation, so I'm an internationally certified coach and also a master practitioner, things like NLP, neurolinguistic programming, kind of subconscious and subconscious mindset and techniques, cognitive behavior therapy, timeline therapy, and hypnotherapy. Also accredited by the Association for Coaching as an accredited coach trainer. It's just a few little bits about myself. So, the personal bits. Why would anybody listen to me other than the formal training of my coaching and things like the Divorce Coaching Academy, the UK's only accredited divorce coach training program, which I'm co-founder of? Like I said, about my kind of personal story, this is my extended blended family. So take a minute to kind of cast your eyes over the family portraits, and what you'll come to notice is that there's 4 kids and 4 parents in those pictures. Now, easiest way to describe this, in a very weird walk twist of fate, is my partner's ex-husband is my ex-wife's boyfriend. So yes, all the parents swapped around, or as my adult daughter describes it, we parent swapped. So in our unique situation, you've got this blended pot of 4 kids going between 2 different homes, and in each home is the alternate set of parents. Now, logistically, works absolutely fantastically now, but it wasn't without its challenges and its difficulties in the earlier days, many, many years ago. So I've filled out the C100s, I've done the CAFCAS interviews, we've had those bitter, contentious experiences, sending those emails, pretending like we're the lawyer and we know what we're talking about, and compiling bundles and position statements. And we've gone through all of that horribly emotively and physically draining stuff. And at the end of it, when we walked away with our court orders and the ink drying, what we had to do is effectively then start working together more effectively. And it's actually one of the reasons now why both myself, my partner, my ex-wife, we've done a series of kind of mainstream media talks, things with various TV channels and so on and so forth, talking about more effective co-parenting, how to deal with contentiousness and difficult ex-partners, and how we all got through our situation to a point where actually now we all have a very happy blended extended family across the two homes. Only 45 minutes ago, I heard the door go as my ex-wife let herself in to drop off my youngest boy. So now we kind of share those moments and those holidays and just random Sundays and things like that. So it can be done, and that coming back from the brink of going to kind of final court hearings and all of those types of things. So just to say that I've lived it, I've breathed it, I've got the t-shirt and I've got the hoodie, so I know exactly what I'm talking about. Cool. So let's just quickly touch on what we are talking about today, what we're talking about when we say a difficult X or a contentious X. Now, so on the left there with the big cross through it, what we're not talking about today is things like personality traits or disorders. Right. One of the things that comes up very often in the world of divorce and separation is things like narcissism, certain behavioural traits, mental health conditions, and so on and so forth. Now, we're not looking at that today. We're just looking at when there's awkwardness, there's difficulties, there's contention. But if you are interested and want to know more and explore any of those things, particularly things like narcissism and so on and so forth, there is a host of information on recorded Stowe talks with professionals that focus in that area as well. So definitely go have a look at the podcasts and YouTubes on Stowe talks, because there's a whole host of information for if you're dealing with somebody with a particular personality disorder or mental health conditions. So what are we talking about? So what we are talking about is, as we said, kind of difficult or contentious people, awkward people, right? An awkward ex-partner, ex-spouse, someone that is obstructive, disruptive, seek to cause panic and challenge situations and arguments wherever it might be, right? Kind of counter-parenting maybe, or constant disagreement. You say that wall's blue, they say it's red. Whatever you said you can't do right for doing wrong, right? Ineffective or challenging or even hostile communications, potentially. People that want to kind of poke the bear and cause arguments and disruption to your life and cause emotional distress to you, and a whole host of different things. So that's kind of where we're focusing today. And it might not necessarily all fit within that left-hand side. So we're just looking at where it's difficult and how those situations might pertain to your own. Just going to pick my tea. So while we're thinking about difficult people, and this is really hard to do. It seems and sounds very obvious on the surface of things, but it's really hard to do it when you're there in the moment, right? When things are impacting you, experiences, external events, things people are saying, is to really just pause, being able to pause for a moment and learn to explore what is and is not in your control. We can't control their behaviors, how they speak to us, their tone, them showing up on time, their attitude towards us, right? Any of their behaviors, if they have forgiven themselves or us or vice versa, right? How they move forward from the past. We can't control any of that. So we really have to look at, okay, in those experiences, in those events that we can't change, right? I'm sure a lot of you are probably even thinking to yourselves, I couldn't change them when I was with them. I couldn't change those attitudes or those behaviors or the way they spoke to me. How are you going to change that now that you're not together and you're trying to effectively co-parent? And we're going to talk a bit more about language and co-parenting in a moment. So it's about how do we kind of start to look at the bits that we can control, like how can we control how we approach situations, how we let it impact us, our reactions versus response, our own emotional regulation, how we're showing up to situations, right? Where we can not necessarily change, but we could look to positively influence situations differently. It was Michelle Obama that had it in her book about when they go low, we go high, right? And actually getting caught in that stuck state of the fears over what we can't control and getting drawn into those conflicts and those negative situations and those difficult, awkward, contentious scenarios actually only pulls us down further. So we can I recognise it can be really, really hard to, in the moment, to get back to what can we control? What can I focus on that's me, that's my accountability, my decisions, my consistency, how I'm showing up, my values and belief systems, right? How can I be true to me? But it's a really important thing to keep. And actually, I share this as a screenshot, as an image on WhatsApp with my clients, as well as some others that I'm going to show you today. And feel free to take pictures of any of these, because I get my clients to save these things to their camera reel so that when they are in an experience, a situation, right, where emotions are high and that contention is there, they're finding things hard to do, they can go back to something and have a visual aid that they can recall back to, and they can start to focus back in on what's inside their control and what's outside of a control that we can't change. So just start to explore what you can and what you can't control. I mentioned the word a minute ago about accountability and reflection, looking at ourselves. So one of the other things that, again, can be really, really hard to do is not just looking externally, but also looking internally as well. If there is difficulties, if there is contentiousness and awkwardness, right, start to explore where it's coming from. So I run my private coaching practice, my divorce coaching practice, on 3 core values of understand, evolve, and improve. Everybody wants the last one. Everybody wants things to be better, wants the improvement. But to be able to achieve that, what we need to do is start working back and look at where's the evolvement, where's the change, what can we do differently, how can we do it differently, what resources do we need, what's the part that I may be playing here, not blame, but cause and effect, the events that lead to, right? So again, think about that, what's in our control. But it helps us look at where maybe that is deriving from. Again, love old sayings, but like the world's a stage and we're all playing a part. What's our part? What did we play in that scenario? Is our emotion still high and impacting this scenario? Are we deriving some of that contentiousness? Not necessarily say that it is, but it's just, again, just looking at the bits that we play. Right? I'm not going to go through absolutely every single one of these, but there's a whole host of different reasons that can drive that contentiousness. Right? Things like, I've got the grief wave there, and the traditional grief cycle, Kubler-Ross, of denial, anger, depression, so on and so forth, to acceptance. Right? It's very different when you're going through a relationship breakup, right? Because the final stage actually isn't acceptance, it's disconnection. For many people, the actual acceptance phase of the breakdown of a relationship or the separation can actually come quite earlier, can come a lot sooner, particularly dependent on where they are on their own journeys and their own paths. But that last stage of the grief wave is, as I say, disconnection. And that's disconnection in forms of practically housing, finances, legally, if you're actually divorced yet, through to a whole host of different things, but then also subconsciously and emotively. So where things begin to impact you less, when actually the other person's behaviors actually, the less they don't land on us as much, we can start to kind of like let go of them, even laugh them off. That doesn't have to impact me anymore, right? And again, just focus on you, what you can control. One of the other ones there, our support network, our loved ones, our nearest and dearest. Lovely to have them around. They're there when we need them to pick us back off the floor, right? To make sure that we eat, that make sure that we're looking after ourselves. What we also have to remember with our really close personal family support networks, family and friends, is they also have an emotional investment and an emotional attachment to this experience that we're going through. And we also have to think about actually where is that potentially either a positive or potentially bringing a negative to the support network. Is it actually stopping us from being able to co-parent in the way that we want to? And are we actually taking our decisions or other people's as well? So it's also just looking at things like our support networks. One of the ones that's a really big one here is about sort of 5th, 6th one down the left there, is out of the mouth of babes. Our little darlings, I've got 4 of them, that they do test our boundaries. That's their job, right? To find out where the lines in the sand are, right? And very often there's things that can become, particularly if they're being used as the messengers, or even if they're not, what can happen is that things can get taken out of context and misconstrued. And again, that could potentially be deriving some contentiousness as well. I'll give you a live example from 7, maybe 8 years ago now, actually. Yeah, coming up 8 years ago. It was one of the weekends that my 2 boys from my first marriage were with me. My ex had dropped them off with me because we do equal drop-offs rather than collections. And on the Saturday, I took the boys to go and get a haircut. And my eldest at the time, he was 8, about that, turned around to me and said, "Oh, Mum says you can't take us for a haircut." Didn't know what I know now. I was still in that stuck state and thinking about what I can't control. And what did I do? I immediately went to, "I'm your father. If I'm taking you for a haircut, I can do what I want. It's my weekend." Right? Completely wrong thing to do. Fortunately, 24 hours later, recognising my mistake, I both not just apologised to my sons, but I also apologised to my ex-wife. what transpired was that mum was actually saying something to the boys to help me. She was actually saying to them, look, your dad's going to take you for a haircut this weekend. Don't go to so-and-so's, go to that one because it's not as expensive. She was actually looking out for me and saying something kind. But out of the mouth of babes, that got misconstrued. I took it the wrong way, and that drove contentiousness, right? That brought it up. So just being able to, if we've got more effective communication, even when there is still difficulty between the two of you, if we can still have more clear and concise and open communications, we can then talk about these things and get to the root causes, so those situations don't come up. Like I said, there's a whole host of different reasons that could derive contention. This was just to give you a bit of an idea of what some of the very common ones are and what you might be able to witness in your own scenario, and whether, again, if that is an external thing with them or if that's an internal thing with us, and also if it is anything coming from us, what might be contributing to that situation. So the reality of difficult co-parenting. Now, I know it's much easier for me to sit here now having a very happy and sustainable co-parenting friendship even with my ex and for my partner with her ex. But I completely get it. It's really, really difficult. And many of you here will likely feel like you are on an emotional roller coaster. You're going up, down, left and right, getting thrown about, and you just don't really know if you're coming or going. Right? And that feeling of helplessness, frustration, like resentment as well, those are all very valid feelings and emotions to experience as well. And it can also keep that kind of constant tension that then also impacts us physically, right, as well as emotionally and psychologically. So it can derive things like chronic stress, anxieties, even clinical depression. Those things are obviously going to lead on to and have an adverse effect to things like poorer self-care, poor sleep, poor diet, right, low appetite, and a whole host of different things that are going to be impacting us. And that is the reality. I'm sure a lot of you are probably sitting there at home like nodding at the moment, like, yeah, I can't sleep, I'm constantly stressed, it's infecting work, I feel like I'm shouting at the kids, right? I'm not eating, I'm not exercising, I feel rubbish, don't like myself, and all these things are coming out because of this emotional roller coaster. I wanted to put a bit of a definition, so I'll leave you guys to read the main kind of bulk of the definition there, but the bit that I kind of wanted to point out was that kind of last paragraph that I put there, which is difficult co-parents, and I'm going to talk about the phrase of co-parenting in a minute, when it's purposeful and it's obstructive and all those things we were talking about earlier, it's the conflict creators, like I said earlier, trying to drive that contract, right? The emotional manipulators to make us feel differently than we otherwise would, right? And they become the roadblocks to effective co-parenting. I read different bits of research all the time, and there was one which I'll happily and gladly share the link with National Institute of Health, that looked at not just the individuals, but also the children in a high conflict and difficult, contentious divorce process, and indeed conflicting co-parenting relationship can have the very similar and likable symptoms of PTSD. So in children, like lack of sleep that we're talking about, night terrors, in kids, bedwetting, right? Behavioural situations, regression or aggression or isolation, right? And withdrawal. So these experiences can cause PTSD-like symptoms if gone unchecked and unsupported and not dealt with. Really important to just think about, right, and evaluate, are we really co-parenting? If it's that difficult and it's creating those types of environments, are we really co-parenting? And the reason I say that is I want us to look at the differentiators between co-parenting and parallel parenting. It can actually be really helpful in the first instance just to even recognise and put the correct description or label to it to at least lessen the pressure and expectation. So if we think about co-parenting as a description, it's when the two of us are working together, right? Two people, two parents working together. I think of it like the old phrase from lockdown, like working together whilst working apart. Both solely focused on the project, the children or kid, but working separately but still together simultaneously, right? And if we think of any kind of prefix word or phrase with co, it's collaborative, it's cohesive, right? Again, it's supportive, it's a partnership, we're working together. So if you're dealing with a difficult X, a contentious X, right, are we actually co-parenting? And is the expectation and pressure that we build on ourselves that we're to be co-parents, is that actually making it harder for ourselves? And is it actually putting more strain and pressure on ourselves to be seen to be co-parenting? Because that's the ideal, right? And that's where everybody would preferably in an ideal world like to be. But unfortunately, it's not always a reality. So sometimes we might need to shift that. The suitability for co-parenting is where it's not high conflict. You can still sometimes have high emotion, and that's fine, so long as it's then taken to the appropriate spaces and managed in the right way, not one another, and especially not in front of the children. But co-parenting is not suitable for high conflict. So if the difficult X that you're working with is high conflict and not just high emotion, right, then we're probably not co-parenting, it's probably not suitable. Co-parenting is not suitable where there are safeguarding concerns, where we have experiences of domestic abuse, coercive control, so on and so forth, right? Or when we've been through CAFCAS Section 7s and fact finds and things like that. Right? This isn't where we would be co-parenting. There's still a different style of parenting. It just wouldn't be applicable to use the right phrasing of co-parenting. I've put in brackets on the other points there about not friends. Co-parenting, great if that can be achieved, right? And it can be. I've witnessed it. I see it every day with a whole host of different clients. Right? It can be achieved, but the things that we need that not necessarily mean that we're being friends is open lines and forms of communication. Again, that doesn't necessarily always mean agreement, but at least acknowledgement and understanding, where we can see where the other person's coming from. You're dealing with someone that's difficult, it's really difficult, really contentious, trying to drive those challenging situations, it's probable to conceive that you maybe don't have true open lines of effective communication. And the other examples here for kind of how we look at kind of more effective co-parenting is where there is that agreed plan in place, right, that we've come to jointly. Again, even with the support of professionals, be that mediator, family lawyer, coach, whatever it might be, yeah? Or even with maybe potentially support of family and friends, but having an agreed parenting plan. Co-parenting also isn't about 50-50. I actually say it's not 50-50, it's about 100-100, both of us being 100% committed to this process. It is about finding what does equitable look like. And that might not necessarily mean 1 week on and 1 week off due to work patterns, distance, travel for work, or whatever it might be. So it can be a whole host of different reasons. So it might not necessarily mean that that is an immediate splitting of the week or weeks, but it's how is it equitable to both of you, and ultimately for your child or your children. And then the other things there that are again, quite obvious with a successful co-parenting relationship, we tend to have quite mirrored foundational rules and disciplines, things like bedtimes or modern day terms, screen time, big one, right? And where we can mirror those rules in each other's homes, because that also helps us to then enforce those in the other home when the children are back, because we can mirror a lot of those rules. Right? Okay, so that just give a bit more of a definition around actual true co-parenting. Now, if we're dealing with difficult, contentious X, for say, it might be better to rephrase and actually reframe and put this under the guise and the context of parallel parenting. So I put my train tracks up there on the top left, right? So differently as compared to co-parenting, where we're both working together but separately, with parallel parenting, it's very separate. We're on completely different trajectories and different tracks. Right? It says there, a process of disengagement between the two parents who cannot communicate directly. Right? That is an ineffective mutual partnership. It means that we're doing it separately but simultaneously. Parallel parenting is suitable for when it is high conflict. So if you are dealing with someone who is highly contentious, who is argumentative at every corner, who is obstructive in all different ways and manner and forms, then look to actually reframe this as parallel parenting, because that can also then help you start to understand how to parallel parent and where those lines are and those boundaries, which we'll talk about in a moment. Parallel parenting is also the most suitable for where there are safeguarding concerns, like we said earlier, domestic abuse, coercive control. If you're dealing with someone with personality traits, again, go and have a look at the other resources from Stowe on narcissism with Dr. Supriya McKenna, and she talks a lot about that, and parallel parenting world. Dealing with hostile communications, aggressive, not assertive, but aggressive, blame, accusation, aggressive, threatening communications. So the other examples that we would then, and considerations for you to then consider and kind of map against, if you're thinking at the moment like you've got challenging co-parenting, and start to think, actually, are we really parallel parenting? Is, do we have very different or very separate rules and boundaries around our parenting styles, and rules and rewards and reprimands in the house, and those behaviours that we are and are acceptable? Typically means that we're not sharing or attending similar events, be that parents' evening or nativity play. We might be, but extremely separate at best. Typically, there is very little to no direct contact. Parallel parenting requires a very rigid set of parameters with very little flexibility, and opportunity for change. So there is pros to it, but of course there's cons to it as well. What it can give you is a very rigid set of structure and a rigid process and formula to go by, and to adhere to for both of you, as well. But it does leave very little in terms of flexibility, and that can impact things like change requests, right down to moving home, introducing new partners, and a whole host of different things. Right? So just thinking about, are we actually co-parenting or are we parallel parenting? And if that actually helps to reframe that and change that status and that label to it, to just say, look, actually, we're not at that phase yet. Maybe we need to stick in this form for a while, and we need to keep contact, direct contact, to a minimum, and we need to define stronger and stricter boundaries and have a bit more regulation around how we operate and how we minimize interactions, things like using school as the transition or handover location and things like that. If that's going to help lessen the contention, then that's a really good start, because again, it can help both of you to come away and then focus on yourselves, focus on your children, start to rebuild, and then you can start to work back up to potentially being effective co-parents. I don't want to spend too much time in here because there's quite a few tips that I want to go through with you in some other slides, and I actually thought that this was just helpful to point to what might be, so we can just acknowledge some of the experiences that some of you might be witnessing in your everyday attempts to co-parent and indeed potentially parallel parenting. And that's looking at those kind of common behaviours that we might witness in people, like strategic, tactical kind of power plays to shift our imbalance, to make us question, to take control of certain situations. That might be through things like guilt tripping, right? Or lower level threats as opposed to really obvious ones, the more kind of, as I say, subtle undercurrents, the subliminal ones, the gripes, the criticisms, a little chipping away, right, to kind of take us down a little bit and manipulate certain situations, or make out that they're the ones that are actually in control, right? And it's all about tactics for power, right? You then got things like emotional abuse as well as every other form, but the words and the actions, and not just sometimes even what they say, but even how they say it or how they deliver it, or how often they may be delivering it as well. And the process there is to break down and chip away at the self-esteem, right? To belittle, to humiliate. And it doesn't leave the physical scars, it leaves psychological and emotional ones. We don't use phrases like kind of parental alienation. What we look at now is alienating behaviours. What's actually the actionable based behaviour that we can look towards? Being obstructive. I had somebody some time ago, about a year or so ago, where they had arrived to collect the children, and it was in the middle of summer, and they were told the child wasn't allowed to come because it was too hot outside. Yet the child had been out with friends and doing other things and playing in the garden. But again, that behaviour of a process of denigration, as it says, to create obstruction, to create obstacles, create false narratives and undermine the other parent. Again, that can be really, really difficult to deal with. You might then start to witness what we call an independent thinker phenomenon, which is actually where the statements that otherwise wouldn't be suitable, age appropriate, or statements coming from the child themselves, where actually that difficult partner has actually started to instill that in them as well and create false loyalties. And one of the other big difficulty behaviours that we witness is where we talk about communications and communication breakdowns, ineffective communications, the ghosting, stonewalling, refusal to engage in any form of communication, just completely ignoring messages, or the pertinent parts of the messages, only talking about the bit they want, which isn't typically child-centered in that regard when you've got that difficulty with someone, or the polar opposite, bombarding with messages. I had a client that's about 3+ years ago, someone that was working collaboratively with myself and Stowe, and they had, I think from memory, it's about 11, 12 different routes that their partner, their former spouse, was effectively bombarding them with communications, like their work phone, their home phone, their mobile, text, WhatsApp, work email, personal email, right through to letters through the door, right? But all to kind of cause disarray and cause disruption and cause an emotional impact to that person. So then it's a space of helping them to find the rules and the guidelines and the boundaries to how do we streamline and centralize your form of communication, so there is a path for communication, but we put up roadblocks and limit the others as well to lessen that impact to you, but still have a form of open communication. Now, the other things that I want to talk about, and this was actually on the write-up for today, was actually about navigating emotional difficulties. And I want to see it kind of, I want to understand and let you recognize that I know what you're going through and how hard that can be. And that roller coaster of emotion, it can be a whole host of different emotions and all at the same time, right? And that's one of the things about emotions, they just come at us like waves, right? What I wanted to be able to provide for you all today is actually not just navigating those emotional difficulties, but to give you some actual tools, some nice, simple, basic techniques that I also use with my clients on a one-to-one basis, just things that you can take away from today. One of the first ones is the hello, my name is about labeling them, giving them a name. Right. They actually teach this in PSHE at schools these days with children to actually help label their emotions, and it might not even actually be the label of emotion of anger or upset. It might actually be to give it a different name, right? And actually to give it a personified name potentially, or name it after animals, and then they can helps them to actually dialogue and verbalize what those emotions are when it maybe doesn't have kind of the bigger attachment of what that word means. But for us, it might actually be easier to kind of sit there and label them and put them out. Right? What is it that you're actually feeling, and those emotions that are present for you, right? And get them written down so that we've actually got them there and we've got something that we can reflect to, right? And things that we can start to unpack and understand a bit differently. The other thing is, on the left-hand side of the screen, is this wheel, the wheel of emotion, as we call it. Sorry, my tongue's getting cold. Again, something I share with clients, send to them over WhatsApp, stick it on the camera reel, something they can go back to in between sessions, and something that take a picture of it, or I can get it sent to you somehow. But this can be really helpful to, once we've labelled the emotions, is to start in that inner circle there and identify it, right? And it might be a series of them, right? But to pick that one out and go, right, but that's feeling really angry. Okay, so let's go down a step, let's go down a layer and start looking into the feelings that derive the emotion. Now, emotions and feelings have the same surface level titles: anger, sadness, fears, guilt, shame, hurt, whatever it might be. But what we want to look at is chunking down and going down a layer into the deeper feeling that it comes from, that it derives from. So actually we're angry because we're, pick one out, frustrated. Okay, so now we can start to look at what's the specifics of what we're actually frustrated about. The event, the experience, what they did, what they said, what they didn't do, etc. So we can go down a layer beneath what's frustrated. So is it that we're actually annoyed, or are we infuriated? When we start to keep chunking down and keep going down those different layers into understanding, right, we can lessen the emotional reaction. So emotions are the reactive state. Right? So if we're angry, the emotion is the outcome. Like it might come out in crying, it could come out in throwing something, could be come out in a whole host of different ways. what we want to do is use this wheel to chunk down, because then what we can do is go down into the little heart-shaped recycle pattern there, where it's got thoughts, feelings, and emotions. Because to change our emotion, what we want to do is to navigate those difficult emotions, is, if we want better emotional regulation, is how do we change the emotion, the emotional outcome? And to do that is to do the chunking down and work back through the feelings. So what am I actually feeling? Where is it coming from? What started it? We can then go from the feelings to the thoughts. So what was the thing that went off in my head internally that brought that feeling up for me? Right? That feeling of frustration, right? That feeling of feeling detached, that feeling of feeling broken or ridiculed. Right? Going into the thought, we can then look at, well, what was the external event that created that made us have those thoughts that derive the feelings? Right? Now we can start to reframe then and help change our thoughts. And now we're linking it to the earlier part about what we can and can't control. We can't control that external event. What we can do is start to think about and challenge our thoughts to reframe it and look at things differently, and what we can learn from it and take away from it. And if we can shift our thinking, we can start to impact our feelings. When we start to impact our feelings and improve those, we can impact the emotional regulation, and we can calm ourselves down better. So it keeps coming back to those things about understand, evolve, and improve. This is doing the understanding bit. You can then find the improvement and the change for you, and then you get to your final stage. So I just mentioned something about reframing. So what is reframing? It's flip side of the coin. How else could it be? What would be the alternative or a different lens that we can look at this through? I had a client years ago who was describing their teenage daughter, and I have one, which is 19 now, going on 25. But this client had mentioned about their teenage daughter, and she was like, she's bone idle, she doesn't listen to me, and etc. etc. So we sat there and actually said, okay, look, let's just have a look at this, and how can we reframe it? Just give you an example of reframing. Right. Look at those traits that you've embodied in her, and those life lessons learned, and her characteristics. How else could we look at them? Well, she doesn't suffer fools. She knows her own mind. She knows what she wants to do. She won't be taken advantage of in the workplace. She's going places. So it's how can we reframe that and see things from a different lens? So when we're reframing, it can work with changing our thoughts, feelings, and emotions. A couple of other little tips and techniques is down the bottom left there, we've got inner critique and inner champion. The voice inside our head, called auditory digital. Right? We all talk to ourselves. We all have those little things, right? Those little thoughts that we say to ourselves. And we all have an inner critique, but we also very often don't pay much attention to the inner champion. Right? So actually looking to, again, maybe personify it, give it a character. For me, my inner critique was my old school bully. It have no impact on me now, but back then I wasn't their biggest fan. I didn't appreciate their opinion. I didn't think they were that smart, and I didn't really take on board anything that they said as any value. So I personified my inner critique as this person whose opinion I didn't hold in high regard. My inner champion is someone I respect, someone I admire, a kind, good, decent human being that I know and look up to. So when I have those inner critique, those thoughts, those little internal dialogues where we're challenging ourselves and putting ourselves down, it's flipping that away from the inner critique, engaging and talking to our inner champion. Right? What would that version say? That positive version, that reflective, kind version. And then we can challenge the inner critique as well and put them back in their box. And then the last two bits there for managing and navigating emotional difficulties. Looking at the triggers, a very common word that gets used by counsellors, therapists, coaches. Right? It's just, what was the thing that set it off? Right? And if we can start to identify those things, what can we do in our boundaries, we're going to talk about in a moment, to actually implement change there, to lessen their impact to them, or to put up a guardrail to it so it doesn't happen, or that we mitigate it or reduce the potential of it happening. And then also start to look at what can we also do with all of the other tips that we were looking at. But identifying the first thing that sets us off can also be really, really helpful to start changing how we feel about things, because then we can work forwards. And then the last thing is body scanning. Where do you feel it? The emotion and the feelings. Where do you feel it in your body? Do you get tense? Is it in your shoulders, in your back? Like, do you feel weighted down? Right. Do you get tense rage in your hands? Right. So is it in your chest or in your core? Does it affect your breathing? By body scanning, we can then, when we identify where that emotion is in a feeling in our actual body physically, we can then start to look at what things might uniquely work for you. So if it's in the chest or kind of the abdomen, we can look at things like breathing exercises, or box breathing, as we call it. Breathing in for 4, holding to the count of 4, exhaling to the count of 4. Or we can look at if it's muscle tension, for example. One thing we could look at is something called progressive muscle relaxation. Right? So actually focusing in on those muscle groups, right? Linking at things like grounding techniques, consciously learning to tense up those muscles and to release, tense them up and to release. Because then when we actually have that tense moment in a live scenario, we've actually already trained ourselves subconsciously that when that tension's there, that we actually have control, we can release it, and then we can lessen the physical impact. Again, if we're lessening the physical impact, we can start to lessen the emotive, psychological impact as well. Just a few little tips there around navigating the emotions and feelings. I mentioned another word a minute ago around boundaries. Another word that coaches, therapists, counsellors love to use. Boundaries are ground rules, are lines in the sand, what is and is not acceptable. When we're dealing with a difficult, contentious, argumentative, challenging ex, it's really important that we build those very clear and also very consistent and backed up boundaries. It's very typically, it's actually ourselves that alleviates those boundaries. They're going to keep pushing up against them. I love analogy, so I always use one because my son likes it, of like the gates at Winterfell in from Game of Thrones, and like that big old oak door that they're trying to bat up against and trying to get into. Well, that's our boundary, is the door, right? Where actually that is or is not an acceptable line to cross, right? That wall only gets breached if we don't reinforce it, and then once we've let those doors open once, it will happen time and time again. So it's really about the enforcement of those boundaries and the clarity of them, and them to be consistent. Right? Other things within boundaries is knowing both not just how to effectively say no, but also when is it also pertinent to say yes. Right? Where are there maybe opportunities to bring in any kind of positive, right? But also accept where and how to say no, and more effectively to put that into place. Right? I'm not comfortable discussing that topic. Right? Using I statements, so it's less blame and accusatory. Right? I'm not comfortable discussing this topic at the moment. This is going to be something that we talk about on another day. Right? And it says that being assertive, not aggressive. Right? Using things in your communications, potentially, if you've ever come across the acronym of BIFF, BIFF, stands for brief, so short, sharp, concise, and punchy. To the point. Informative, so factual data, not emotion and blame. Right? Friendly, right? We don't have to put dear Mr. or dear Ms. Right? We can still put hi Tom, hi Ashley, right? But firm with your point, what that parameter is that has been set and pre-agreed, or whatever it might be, or the point that we need to agree. So just think about that in more effective communication as well. Other things like setting time limits as well, right? Okay, look, we can talk about that thing now, right? But actually we've got a time limit here of 10 minutes. And if it's on the phone or if it's in person, whatever it is, if the boundary gets broken of their behaviour, of what is and is not acceptable, that you've clearly and concisely and consistently set out previously, right? If that is breached, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with how this conversation is going. I am going to be ending the call, or I'm going to leave now. We'll take a 5-minute break and we'll come back to it, or talk about it tomorrow, next week, whatever it might be, right? But if it needs that, you need to set time limits and rules and guide rails around how the two of you are going to be more effective communicators, then that is effectively what boundaries are. Okay. And ultimately, we want to be able to put the children in the centre, not the middle. We want them as our focal point, not as a tug of war going between us, not carrying those messages between us, right? And creating the structure around that doesn't put them in those situations. The other thing we were going to talk about today on the write-up was about us focusing on our parenting and our parenting styles, and not just externally with the other party. So on the four, you've got on the right-hand side, you've got the four quadrants there of the four primary parenting styles: permissive, authoritative, neglectful, and authoritarian. Really cast your eyes over those, and not externally about your former spouse, former partner, but actually just about yourselves. I just want you to cast an eye over those and just explore like what you feel your parenting style is. Which parenting style you think is the most relevant and pertinent for your family and for your children, and your style and approach. Because particularly with parallel parenting, as we kind of move towards, it's focusing on your parenting style. How do you approach things? Research suggests that actually it's the authoritative parent that has the most widely attuned children. Right? The other things that we want to look at here is things about your parenting style, but also how that pertains in action and behaviour, like in your home and in your environment. Is that an emotionally safe place? Is it an emotionally warm place? Do our kids feel happy and safe coming to our environment? Can they come to us for guidance? Do they understand that we have boundaries and the rules that are there for them to protect them and to create structure, which, again, everybody knows this, it's 101 research, right, that children thrive on structure and boundaries. They push up against it, just like those boundaries, right? But that's actually how they learn. Case in point, you can actually think about that in the same context with a difficult ex. Think of it like they're the toddler on the aisle of Tesco's having a kicking and screaming tantrum because they're not doing the thing that you want them to do, right? Because you've enforced your boundary. Well, like the toddler, whilst you can't change them, they can only change themselves. Eventually, they will find their own way, and you might never witness it, you might never experience it, but they will find a different path, a different outlet, or they will find their own change. Right? Exactly the same for your parenting style, right? Providing safe, warm, happy, stable environments, right, that suits your parenting style, and focus on your memories, your traditions, how you guys operate in your household. We do, in my scenario, we have what we call a 2-2-5-5 child arrangement. So they're Mondays and Tuesdays at the other house, at their other home. Wednesdays and Thursdays are here. And then we alternate the Friday, Saturday, Sunday through to Monday morning school drop-off. One thing we have done for 5, maybe probably 6+ years now, every night that they're here, we always sit and have a meal at the table, a little bit kind of maybe old school, maybe not everybody does that, but we do. And one thing that we do during, or usually just after dinner, is something we call best and worst. And we take turns, we go around the table, and every day the kids will talk about, as well as the adults, and we'll take it in turns, and each day we start with someone different and they pick who the next person is, and we go around the table and we do our best and worst about our day. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, the worst, it might just be our least favourite thing. We started doing it as a way to learn about our children's lives outside of their phones and Minecraft and school and everything else, and also social skills, being able to talk about difficult emotive experiences and a whole host of different things. But that's what I'm saying about build your traditions. That's something that we did, and now actually it's something that the kids want to do, and it's something that they're actually the first ones to say about it. So it's just about thinking about your own parenting style. Focus on your approach and how you want to parent in your household. And then lastly, quite a bit of cram stuff on here, but I didn't want it to be too many slides for you. The two other things we said we were going to talk about today was well-being and support. So what's well-being? Well, I like to kind of flip the word the other way around, right, and ask it as a question, like, how are you being well, right, in all forms? So it's looking at all those different parts of physically, our body, our mind, our heart, and feelings, connections, a whole host of different things. And well-being is different things for different people. So it's about looking at what's best for you and what keeps you being well. Right? That feeling of being at complete peace with yourself, your situation, happy with your life, right? Being able to look forward to the future as well as enjoying the present whilst not looking at the past. Right? So think about all those different forms of well-being, and there's just a few kind of pictorial examples here. For some people, that is meditation or yoga. Right? Nutrition plays a key one, right? What we put into our bodies as well, right? Through to things like more journaling, right? A really popular one. Gratitude diaries, for example, right? Or affirmations, quite a popular one. Things like our social well-being, our social connections. I've got the little emojis down there on the left, like being able to actually talk and interact with people. Right? Our social networks play with our social beings, like, and we want to be social and be heard and be validated, and also do that for others. Right? So it's also about getting to talking groups, it might be, or being out in nature, particularly now it's getting nice and sunny again and not so cold. Right? Then there are other ones, like music can play a really important role, particularly if you're a big fan of music. Music can be a real help towards well-being, right? And again, for emotional release as well. Right? I remember years and years ago, it became my emotional release and my well-being kind of process of emotion years and years and years ago. Whenever I used to drop my boys back at the former matrimonial home in the really early days, on the way home, I'd get halfway back to my new place, which was 2 junctions up the dual carriageway. There was a lay-by halfway along. I'd pull over, I'm a smoker for my sins. I'd open the window, I'd have a cigarette, and I'd put on the same song every single time, because that just gave me 5 minutes to release and get it all out, and got me back to being well. And that song was Father and Sons by Cat Stevens, if anybody's interested. The other things that we can look at, and again, your versions of well-being, like exercise, sport, activities that also bring connection, right? Walking, something creative, arts, or again, just one that's personable for me. I also ride a motorbike. It's one of the very few things that gives me complete clarity in headspace, because I've got nothing else but to concentrate on other than staying upright on my bike. So again, it's just finding the things that give you peace, happiness, clear mind, and being able to be centered and focused on you. So think about what's right for you being well. The other thing, the last thing there, was that we wanted to talk about support. We need positive support networks when we're going through these challenging situations. And again, that might be friends and family, but it might also be other externals. It might be with certain groups, especially since kind of post-lockdowns or even during lockdowns. There's been a huge rise in different support groups, online, offline, all over the place. I've got one there of Andy's Man Group. There's one locally to me, Hearts, Bears, Bucks, called Four Men to Talk. Equally, there's ones for women as well, for the Women in Wellbeing Centre. A whole host of different groups. So again, if it's that you don't have immediate connections who are experiencing similar experiences to you, right, go and find those positive support networking groups. I would say be mindful of certain groups. There are certain spaces online and particular groups where it can descend into negativity and chaos. That's not where we want to be. We actually want to be in more positive, supporting environments, helping where we can learn from other people that have gone through something similar and their own experiences. That might also be in group therapy sessions. It might be working one-to-one with either a therapist or a counsellor or a coach, someone where you want to take that professionally. Again, and it might be that you want to do that online or offline. But just thinking about what support would be right for you. And if you don't know, go and try some different things. One of the things that you can control is locating what's going to be the right support resource for you. That is it from me in terms of all of the slides. If you want to connect with me anywhere online, Instagram, LinkedIn, listen to some old podcasts of mine, or you'd like to book a free consultation and have a chat with me and see how I might be able to help you, either one-to-one or even in a couple setting, because I do work with co-parents in a couple setting as well. You can scan the QR code, you can find me anywhere online, but I'm sure also Stowe would be happy to share contact details with you as well if requested. Other than that, that's it from my slides. Is there any questions? I have seen the chat popping up, so I'll pass over now to Ashley to take the reins.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tom. So informative. As you can imagine, in my line of work, this is the main reason that I see a lot of people. Their communication completely breaks down. One party is particularly difficult. So trying to navigate that as a pair of adults is always going to be best for everybody, right? Not always possible, and you've highlighted that. But I think that with an open mind and a complete child focus, there are so many important tools that you've given us there that I think are going to be so important. So I can't thank you enough. That's really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's look at the first question. What ways are there to help parents regulate their emotions during litigation or mediation? Blimey, that's an interesting one. You want to take the lead, Tom?
So what was it again, sorry? What ways?
What ways are there to help parents regulate their emotions during litigation or mediation?
Cool. Well, let's start with mediation, because I think we should always try and start with mediation, right? I think we can all
Correct.
agree on that if we can.
Yep.
In terms of regulating your emotions when it comes to mediation, that's actually where you can bring, and we talked about boundaries earlier, you can actually bring that kind of approach and ethos into mediation and lean into that with the mediator to help you set that frame. Now, that might be in the early stages of mediation. That might be if emotions are still really high, there's maybe medium levels of conflict, they're being difficult. Of course, that's what we're talking about today. It might start off with something like shuttle mediation. So let's actually get you into different rooms, either digitally or physically, right? The other things that you can then do, if it's either in the shuttle, in the separate rooms, or if you're still in the same room, is things like breathing techniques that I mentioned earlier. Right? There is, have a look at, because I tell you what, one of the great things about like YouTubes and all the rest of it and everything being like kind of immediately available in these things is that we can go and get a lot of these tips online, right? And we can practice them beforehand. So adding in other things, something like, I don't know if anyone here has ever come across something called tapping, EMDR. Right? And there's certain versions of tapping EMDR that you should do with a certified practitioner. Something I'm still doing at the moment. I'm still training on that. But you can still do. I did this one with my daughter when she was 16, doing her GCSEs. So this might also be one for you, Kate, with your daughter, because I know hers is coming up. Which is actually, I can see it putting a thumbs up. Again, this is also something I've seen this and heard about this being trained, and well, not trained, but brought into incorporated in schools and things like PSHE. Again, with kids, getting them to focus on their breathing and different types of breathing, but doing a light version of EMDR and tapping. So that might be taking your thumb, pressing it on your small finger, and then working your way across your hand. And in your head, just counting each time. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can do this, especially if you're online, or even if you're in a courtroom or a mediator's room and your hands are onto the desk. You can do this out of sight without anybody noticing. If we're doing this whilst concentrating on our breathing, whilst with movement, and there's temperature and pressure, and we're also counting in our head, 1, 2, 3, 4. What we're actually doing is we are firing off neurons in a different part of the brain so that they're not going off in the amygdala, which is, if you think of that's the brain, that's the frontal lobe, obviously where logic, reason, etc. Here's your spinal cord. If we flip that open, the amygdala is in here. It's like a little walnut-sized part of the brain. And it's where anxiety and fears run rife. And we have something called an amygdala hijack. Now, our amygdala is there to protect us, right? Fight, flight, freeze, form, trauma response. But what happens in a panic state, to kind of answer this about what you can do, is if everything's firing off here and we're panic and we're fearful, we just want to have a Tom-shaped hole in the door as I run out the mediation room, is if we do this combination of box breathing with some tapping and we're counting it at the same time, we're starting to just get the brain to forcibly fire neurons off somewhere else other than the amygdala, lessening the fears and anxiety. It doesn't eradicate it, but it will reduce it. That will allow you to re-engage the logical part of the brain. But there is a whole host of other things that we could look at, and again, explore that with professionals to do some deeper emotional regulation. Something called like timeline therapy, something called limiting beliefs. There's a whole host of different things that we can do to help you eradicate that.
Thank you, Tom. From a legal perspective, your family lawyer, if you're involved with one, should have the empathy to sort of talk those things through with you, those feelings, how you're feeling about a certain situation, how much it causes you distress. They should be able to talk that through with you and give you sort of the logical how this is going to go. Here are the options available so that you can sort of get that ready in your mind, so that nothing should really be a shock if they're doing their job properly and giving you the information. In terms of practical advice, I think Tom already covered it. A trusted family friend, member, whoever that may be, but who is also very open-minded and practical. I think sometimes, your best friend, your parent is always going to have your back. Never going to kind of see that maybe you're the one being a little bit unreasonable. So having that individual who is going to tell it to you straight and be open with you and really talk through that emotion and everything else is going to be best for you. So hopefully we've answered that for you. If there is anything else, you can always put another message down and we'll cover that. The next question is quite long, so let's go through that one. As someone who is interested in family law, I always wondered how I can build the emotional intelligence and communication skills needed to support clients in these tough situations. Do you have any advice? That's the first half. So, from my perspective, and with how many clients I've dealt with over the years, it's simple repetition. It is meeting people, having conversations, and your empathy grows and you understand more what people have gone through and how they're feeling. So if that's not available to you at the moment, even conversations with your family members, but deep ones, right? How you exactly like you said about dinner table time, what's been bad about your day to day. They can explain that, and you can try and understand from their perspective why they feel that way. It's going to help somebody like me to really empathize with somebody if they're going to come and have a conversation. So, what do you think about that, Tom? Is there is there any other techniques you think can build emotional intelligence?
There's a whole host of building emotional intelligence. I think that one of the big things, particularly if you're talking about someone that is going through divorce as
Sure.
well, right, is have the right team around you. So I'm a huge advocate for kind of that triad of support, right? Legal, financial, and emotional, right? Um, I wouldn't fill out the client's tax return because I'm not an accountant, no more than I would comment on the law because I'm not a lawyer, right? But then having somebody in your corner who is experienced and accredited, working with, helping to learn emotional regulation, right? And how to build different emotional intelligence tools. And a lot of that comes from obviously helping to understand yourselves and how things pertain to you as well, but also externally to others as well. I brought that question up because you said there was a two-parter to it as well.
Yes.
And it said, like, do you have any advice? Also, given your own experience with the divorce, is there anything you wish family lawyers understood better or handled differently? What should be more aware of, or what they should be more aware of?
Be gentle, Tom, please. Yeah.
I suppose that I kind of maybe I've just answered that already, actually, in that part. But of all the family lawyers that I know, and I know many across the country, they all come into this line of work because they want to help people. So they are naturally empathetic, they are natural carers, right? They're naturally human. Um, what I would say is that I think also for family lawyers to recognise where their role as the lawyer, where does that cross over into? And I'll actually use a phrase from the soon-to-be incoming chair of resolution, who said this to me years ago, that sometimes she felt like an expensive box of tissues. And what she wanted to do was say, I completely get that. I'm with you. I really feel for you. She's a hugely human, empathetic person, deeply caring person, highly emotionally intelligent. But she would then also get to a phase of, whilst I can hear that and whilst I'm here with you, I don't have the tools and resources to help you then work through it and find the fix and the solution for you. So again, I think it just kind of comes back to that building the right team around you. I think and that's one of the things that I have witnessed since my divorce, which was what, separated in March 2017, divorced by the following Feb 2018. With all the family lawyers, family law professionals, mediators, barristers that I work with, is there has been a huge shift about that in the last sort of 5, 6+ years of true collaboration and building that team around a client. And that's one thing that I know from all the people at Stowe that I've met across the country are huge advocates for.
Absolutely, Tom. I think just to be clear, will give you that empathy. Of course we will. We want you to understand. We want to go through that with you. But your bill is going to be exceptionally high if you're going to ask, effectively like me to be a counsellor for you. My job is actually to signpost you to the right individual to deal with that aspect. allow me to focus on the bit that I can really drive forward for you. So anyone worth their salt should be telling you that. You know, I'm not going to say, yeah, call me every week and we'll go through it and then send you a whacking great bill. That helps nobody. So I think you're quite right. Building the right team to assist you through any situation is obviously best for everybody.
And it actually helps the client to be more efficient and more effective as
Agreed.
well.
Agreed. You
And it
know,
allows each of the professionals to focus on their job
well,
and
absolutely,
their
because
skills.
you know the reality is my job is to get you the best outcome, but
Mm.
to not take as much money out of your pockets as I can. I'd rather get to the end for the best outcome for everybody. And if I can signpost you to somebody else who's going to give you that help, so I can focus on the bit I'm doing, that's clearly what everyone would want. Okay, so another one in here. How can communication be opened in a suitable manner when the high conflict ex-partner won't engage at all, even through their solicitor or agreeing to parenting apps? Mine is causing issues in every aspect, children, financial divorce, but continues not to engage. This is something that we see a lot. And this is somebody trying to take control and as indirectly, by their non-action, causing you more stress. Now, and I think the best way, from my perspective, from the legal perspective, is Tom's, the word that I would take from is boundaries, right? This is where you now need to start setting boundaries that maybe make their life just that little bit harder to realize that actually you're giving a lot and they're just taking, taking, taking. So those boundaries can be absolutely beneficial. What do you sort of think about that, Tom?
No, I mean, I know because I think in the question it mentioned about like the even ignoring the use of co-parenting apps.
Sure.
And I know that I believe you've probably had him on here before, but representatives from Our Family Wizard, for example, one of the more common ones, and one of the chaps from there was having a very similar conversation several years ago, and he was saying about a piece of advice that he gave with one particular client was actually to keep redirecting. So if there's questions that are coming about from the other side where they're saying they're not engaging at all, but then when they do want to ask a question or it's some information that they want relating to child-related matters, to have that kind of standardized templated response, almost like an out of office, right? To say everything you need is hi Tom, everything you need is in the co-parenting app. If you want to make a request to change or whatever the thing is, we can do it through there. If you're dealing with someone that is that difficult and contentious, I already know exactly what the person that asked this question is thinking and probably saying out loud to their screen going, yeah, but I've done that. And they keep going and they keep going and they keep because they do ramp up. Right. Because again, as we talk about, the purpose is to create a reaction to you. A bit like I gave the analogy of the toddler in Tesco's, kicking and screaming in the aisle. If we've all experienced that at some point, is to keep with that same standardized template response. Right? Because eventually they're going to need to go there and get that information if it's about something they want. Equally, if they're bombarding you as well, the one example I gave about we've had like 11, 12 different paths to entry, and we streamlined it and centralized it, and we put it all into one brand new email that is just that one email address was a email he only used for purposes of his divorce and child arrangements. So it's all centralized there. He built self boundaries of, he checked it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So he checked it 3 times a week. And he also created, again, a set of standardized, just kind of templated responses that were acknowledgement responses that would be, thanks for your email. Hi, Tom, thanks for your email. Right. I will reply back to the pertinent content within 24 hours or whatever it might be. Right. But again, that reinforcement of that structure and that boundary, I suppose if they're not at all answering, it's then, are they not even answering through the lawyer? I think that's when it really comes kind of back to you guys about what can you do from a legal perspective to enforce that kind of engagement and that communication.
And I think that's as much as my last advice is to always go shooting off the court, right? It's the last thing I want to do if I can avoid it. But when you've got somebody who is doing nothing, this is all about control, right? And I'm not going to engage, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. How you combat that is you take that control away, right? And by issuing applications in court in relation to children, and maybe in relation to finances about the divorce, they now have no choice but to engage. So you've kind of taken away that control. And it's so important in cases like mine. There is always one party who likes to be in control. And I think taking some of that away, I say to people, it's going to be tough because they've always had their own way and it's not going to be easy. But you take that away and now you start to get what's much more fair for everybody. So going to court and a judge says, I want this by this date. Okay, ignore a judge and see what happens, right? You can ignore me all you like, but now somebody with power to make decisions here has asked you to engage. So there comes a point where I would be speaking to someone, okay, we've sent 3 letters, for example, and they've not done anything. My advice then does become, I know it's going to be stressful. I know it might not be the route you want to go down, but actually rip the band-aid off, go down this route, and your life will be so much easier because now it's not you asking them to do something. You can almost use the court process as the bad guy, right?
Yeah.
The judge said,
Yeah.
you do this by this date, not me.
Yeah. No, I witnessed that with clients too. And I've also witnessed where actually that can sometimes be the severity and the reality of a potential court and having to stand there in front of a complete stranger who's going to make a decision over your children's lives or your finances or whatever the situation might be, can make it extremely real that they can actually step back from the abyss and they can start to change and behave differently and better. What we have to then be mindful of is that we then don't bring in all of our past angst and etc. And then
Right.
then we step into the bad cop version, right? And then we start to derive some of that contentiousness ourselves, right? It's then about where do we take that to let go of it and then help to move forward. But no, you're absolutely right there. That's exactly why, again, I'm not the lawyer, but that's exactly why court is there, right? For those backstops or those situations where it can't be resolved through other formats, through law assisted, through divorce coaching, through mediation.
Yeah, and that's, like I say, the last thing I want to do is take you to court. It's a stressful situation. It's not best for everybody if it can be avoided. But where somebody is not engaging at all, this is all about control. And when they lose that control, they realize they now have to do something. It shifts. The entire situation shifts. And what you must never remember is if you're the reasonable human being, if you've taken all of Tom's tips, for example, and you've done your breathing, you've taken the children's, views as the primary reason you're doing this, you're trying to put things in place that are best for them, a judge will see that. They're not just going to say to you, you're both being completely unreasonable. If one of you is being as genuine and open as you can to set something up that's best for everybody, what they are more likely to do is say, well, hold on, I can see that mum's offered this, offered that, bent over backwards to accommodate, and you've not engaged. So what do you now have to say? And now you being a decent human being has come full circle and it's the right way to deal with things. So don't ever be afraid to go down the court route. I'm certainly not. I would advise people, look, I don't like doing it if I can avoid it, but there's a reason that you're entitled to. Some people are so difficult that you have no choice. There's another one here, if that's right. If you've still got time.
I've still got a little bit of time. I can hear the door going, which means there's a bundle of teenage kids and my partner coming home from work. So, and if anyone can hear that light banging, that's a very small dog jumping at my study door.
Well, I'll quickly cover this one that's just come in. It says, unfortunately, the court sometimes gives the controller more control and it exacerbates the situation. In an ideal world, that doesn't happen. But of course, in every scenario, there is every chance that a judge maybe doesn't see how things actually are in the first instance. But that doesn't mean you should lose faith. The truth will out. No one can sort of wear that mask for 9 to 12 months or how long a case goes on for. And their attitude will come through and that all that bad behavior will shine through. The children, if they're of certain ages, will then start to say things that maybe that parent has said, and it will start to turn. So please try not to be disheartened, because I understand, right? You go to court, it's an intimidating process as it is, but stick with it. Have faith, things will come right in the end. If you're maybe dealing with it without legal advice, maybe get some, is maybe the advice I'd give, or even speak to someone like Tom to see how you can navigate what the current circumstances are. So let's answer this other one now. Do you have any tips on how to deal with vexatious litigation from a high conflict parent? We have been to court over 25 times, blimey. The judge considered a 9114 order. For anyone that doesn't know, that simply means that it bars the parties from coming back to court unless the judge specifically sees the order and decides that it's acceptable. But it instead suggested mediation despite domestic abuse. The high conflict parent has refused to mediate, which will result in another court hearing. This has been our life for 5 years, and I'm concerned about the impact on your 5-year-old. This is all he's ever known. Would you ever recommend a child therapist getting involved? The short answer is absolutely.
Absolutely.
Whatever you think your child needs, I am never going to advise you not to do that. You know your child better than anybody. And if you think that's going to help them, I certainly don't think you'd be criticised
Not at all, not in the
by a
slightest.
judge.
And talk to the school as well, right? So
Absolutely.
they can help to monitor behaviours or situations for the child as well.
Yeah.
But absolutely explore an opportunity for a child therapist.
There's, some schools offer things like play therapy. They have
Mhm.
some who's actually qualified to do that at the school. So, no, I believe reaching out for support and guidance is never going to cause you a problem. However, if you're going to end up in another court application, I think that on this occasion, if that has to be the way to go, I think that it needs to be there's some finality, Judge. We can't can't come back like this. The child is not going to have the best relationship, and I don't want you to go back to court ever again. I genuinely don't. The amount of times you've gone is mad. Bless you. That's not good for anybody. And if this person is this way inclined, if you have to make one more go of it, I would potentially get the legal advice and get that person involved to say, right, this is the last time, and there can be no more of this. I want the 9114 order in place, and I cannot allow this to impact my child's life. I believe it is. So I've even sought out therapy, bring those in and say, look, I'm so concerned by this that I've had to take these extra steps. And the court's attitude, more like nowadays, is meant to be keeping people out of the court arena. So there has to be a finality to this. All it needs is a certain judge to grab it by the scruff of the neck and say, enough is enough. And I'm sorry that you may have to go back one more time just to do that. I would be disappointed. And it's such a hard thing for me to say because I want to believe that the court should have dealt with it by now already. I genuinely do. Because 25 times, all the judges in my local area would have gone, what are you doing here? Why are you here again? So if you have to go back, I think get some good legal advice, get an order in place and some legal advice to get you through that and get that order that puts this to bed once and for all. Because it should be clear by this point who's being difficult. It's so hard to even advise you anything other than that. Is there anything you can think of, Tom, on top of that?
No, I think the only bit that I was going to add was actually also for yourself, for the person that's asked this question. You've mentioned about would it be recommended for a child therapist, but also what about you? How are you looking after you?
Absolutely,
Come
yeah.
back to that point about well-being, or as I put it, as pose it as a question, how are you being well? Right? You also, old kind of cliche sayings, but you need to be able to put your face mask on before you can put it on for anybody else, right? You need to look after yourself too. So absolutely anything that you can do.
Absolutely. And for that individual, we offer 30 minutes free conversations here at Stowe. Call and ask for me. I'll talk to you. I've got no problem with that whatsoever. If there is anything I can do that will help you get through this once and for all, you just let me know. All right. That is me personally reaching out and saying, get an appointment with me. I've got plenty of availability. Get in touch and I'll guide you if I can. All right.
And
Um,
equally, if it's not on the legal side and they're wanting some additional support from the coaching side and therapeutically, equally, I offer the 45-minute consultation. So there you go. You got yourself almost a solid hour and a half of support there, both legally and emotionally, from myself and Ashley. So drop us
Absolutely.
both a message.
And if it doesn't work out because of cost or what have you, I know so many people I can signpost you to that can give you that advice and guide you through that process. And you will not be left without that help. All right. So thank you everyone for attending. That's the last question. So thank you, Tom. I'm just saying, it's so informative. And anybody who feels like they don't need legal advice and they could get through this with a bit of guidance, bit of support, Tom is clearly the individual to speak to, right? The information you've given is second to none. It's so helpful. And anybody that wants to look up Tom up, all of his details are there. Like you said, Tom, I think you're the only male divorce coach, are you?
There is a handful now. Fortunately, I'm not the only one.
Okay.
But hopefully there'll be more coming along as we get a few more trained. But no, look, I just want to say thank you again to yourself, Ashley, and to the whole team at Stowe for putting these on. These things are invaluable to so many people. So no, I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for kindly inviting me back once again.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Good evening, guys. I'm sure the next details of Stowe talks will come around shortly. I'm just trying to think now. I think it might be about fertility. Understandably, I don't think I should probably host that one. I think I should leave that to a lady to sort of lead that one with you guys. So that one's in April. I'll most likely be back in May. I'm sure Tom will be back again if we can bend him to give us a bit more of his time. And for now, guys, thank everyone for attending. Everything will be available, I believe, on YouTube in the near future. And if there's anything anyone needs, so we're here. Tom's here. Please get in touch. Good evening, everyone.
Take care.